functioning, we don't even look at it. We don't look for the problem. But if someone has a problem, they damage the front part of the brain, now how do they behave? You know, it changes their behavior. They become impulsive. So this is how we learned a lot about the brain. We have a lot more technology now where we don't have to wait. We can actually put someone in an MRI machine and ask them specific questions, and that will cause different areas of the brain to light up. So when you guys are thinking about studying, there are certain areas of the brain that you want to use. You certainly want to be optimizing that. The more you use specific areas of your brain, the stronger that particular connection within the brain gets. There's this whole field called neuroplasticity. And the mantra of neuroplasticity is neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that fire apart wire apart. So what does that mean in layman's terms? The more I fire these prefrontal cortex neurons, the stronger those synapses are going to be, and the more likely you're going to be able to fire them again. Anyone here ever tried to meditate? That's probably one of the hardest things. I've tried it. I'm good for about 5 minutes because what winds up happening, especially when you first start doing it? What am I having for dinner tonight? You know? Then you start looking at the watch, you're like, what's on TV? All of these other things keep popping up in your head. In order to prevent that, that's what strengthening this area is all about. So this is how meditation is great to help increase focus. As a student, you need focus. Big time. So you really want to do things to improve the activity within this area of the brain. Okay? We come down to this area of the brain. We got the old mammalian brain. We'll take the limbic. This area of the brain is more responsible for, this kind of was, it's an important area of the brain. This kind of keeps you out of danger. So, you know, we are in these nice safe buildings, you know, with doors and, you know, we're protected from the environment. Take our hunter-gatherer population, the paleo people. They were out there walking in the woods, then what would happen? Saber-tooth tiger comes up. Boom. What do they have to do now? They activate certain areas that are more central, that are more involved in keeping them alive. So you might activate this area right here called the amygdala. And that's sort of like, that's our fear center. It's like, boom, there's a problem there. And that's going to be connected to certain areas deeper in the brain that are going to control you to release certain hormones like adrenaline. Now your heart rate is going to start beating. Your blood pressure is going to go up. This whole fight or flight response is taken. So this area of the brain, when you're stressed out, you're having some kind of test anxiety, where do you think the metabolic activity is going to preferentially wind up going? To this outer cortex area? When you guys are studying, hopefully you're in a relaxed state, right? So when you go and you sit down and take a test, now what happens? All right, it's not a saber-tooth tiger, but now you see a question you have no idea what it is. I don't remember studying that. Is that on the test? Is that on the review sheet? I don't remember seeing that in notes. Oh, the amygdala is fighting up. So now this area of the brain is valuable, but it's not ideal to have this light up when we're taking a test. Okay? So this is an extremely important area. Now I want everyone to remember this. The hippocampus is critical for forming new memory. Okay? So we're going to talk more about this particular area because this lifestyle changes can negatively affect the hippocampus. Now, this right here, this is where all of your experiences come in. You kind of, what you're learning gets stored in the short term right in that hippocampus. And then it will get diffused if you allow it, if you stimulate that particular memory over and over again, it will get diffused and those memories will become stronger. But it all starts in the hippocampus. So if we do something to damage the hippocampus, you're going to wind up having, anyone here see the movie Memento? Sounds familiar? The guy basically, or Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, no, that one worked. No, go back to Memento. So Memento was a movie about a guy who had absolutely no short-term memory. Some of you, anyone here watch Grey's Anatomy? Who's the blonde again? What's her name?
Izzy.
Izzy. My hippocampus. Doc. Izzy, yes. Izzy had this tumor. She had cancer. And, when she came out of surgery, she had no short-term memory. Initially, she had no short-term memory. So we know that's one of the signs that the hippocampus is down. In her case, it fortunately came back. How do neurons communicate? How do these different areas of the brain communicate with each other? Well, they do it. It's an electrical system. And now this would be one neuron, or the end of one neuron. So here is one neuron, and you can see these neurons have many different branches coming off of them. And some of these branches that are coming off, picture my hand is like a neuron, okay? Now, this is the cell body of the neuron, right? That's the brain. That's the command center of the neuron. And my fingers are basically like the receivers of the neuron. They're basically going to receiving information from, this might be another neuron, going to that, stimulating. So the gaps that is between where a neuron's being stimulated and another neuron's coming in, that's what we're seeing over here. That's called the synapse. Now, in order for these neurons to communicate with each other, they have to release specific chemicals. These chemicals are called neurotransmitters. And now, to make these neurotransmitters, we need to have a variety of different things in our diet. So we'll talk about what allows us to make these neurotransmitters. We'll talk about what several neurotransmitters that are key that I think can relate to most people where we can potentially get them from the diet. So if we got plenty of neurotransmitters, we got plenty of excitation, stimulation of the neuron, right? But if we're deficient in neurotransmitters, those particular areas aren't going to necessarily light up as much. That all make sense? So there is a difference between the male brain and the female brain we should look at. So if we look at the male brain, we got job stuff, power to flow, guy thought. I like this one, the personal hygiene synapse. And here's the commitment neuron. Right. Don't worry, guys, we got the females over here too. Bizarre moods area, shocking low. Fantasy and emotional blackmail system. I like this one over here, logical argument. I am so it's slightly better from Mars, women from BDNF, but slightly different. So let's talk about the effects of chronic stress. What does chronic stress really do? Well, chronic stress has very bad effects on your whole entire body. It affects everything. Okay? Stress is, most of the diseases, 90% of the diseases out there, there's a stress component. Doesn't necessarily mean stress will cause the disease, but if you have a disease, it will aggravate it. And stress in certain cases can actually cause the disease. Stress can actually cause your blood sugar levels to become abnormal. And that can then lead to what kind of disease? Your blood sugar levels wind up becoming abnormal. Diabetes. So it's a contributing factor. Certain people have a genetic predisposition, and now they add stress to the mix, and now they've got the disease. There's, in the old days, we used to think, you've got a family history of this, I'll put a tag on your toe, you're done. But that doesn't seem to be the case now. They're looking at environment plays a huge role in preventing diseases, regardless of whether you have the gene or not. The new mantra they're saying is the environment, or I should say the genes loads the gun, but the environment holds the trigger. Okay, so lifestyle changes can have a significant impact on whether you get diabetes or not, or any disease. So let's look at what stress does. So let's pretend we're out in the savannah. We're wired to be out in the savannah or in the field, walking around. For most of our time, we haven't been in buildings doing what we're doing right now. We've been out hunting, foraging, and, every once in a while we hear a crackle in the back of behind the shrubs. So if you were the type of human that would say, crackle, I'm not going to pay no mind to that, would you probably be here, or would any of your descendants probably be here today? Right? So when you hear something, we tend to have more of if you're out in the woods, let's picture it being dark, you probably tend to have more of a negative bias. That's probably not a butterfly who's going to come land on my finger and give me a kiss on the cheek, right? You're probably going to be thinking of something else. You naturally will have this negative bias. So going back to the brain, what area of the brain might light up just a little bit? Yeah, that whole fight or flight thing. You know, maybe your amygdala will light up a little bit, that primitive area of the brain, right? So what's going to happen? So how is your body going to naturally want to prepare myself? Is it preparing myself for the butterfly, or is it preparing myself for the bear that's about to eat me? Yeah, it's the bear, right? So if you got to get your tuchus out of Dodge, what do you need to do? Run. All right, so you need to run. So for you to run, is this a good time to raise your blood glucose levels or lower your blood glucose levels? Raise them. So any time you're under stress, stress will always raise your blood glucose levels. One of the ways that it does it is the release of a stress hormone, cortisol. You guys have probably heard a lot about cortisol. You see commercials on the TV. You know, take this pill, it blocks cortisol. You know, then you'll lose all this weight. Well, it's a partial truth, all right? If you can control your own cortisol level, cortisol can make you fatter. Why is that? Because cortisol is what? It's a stress hormone. Stress hormone, we now know, raise blood glucose levels. I used to see it when I worked with diabetic patients. I did cardiac rehab, and when I was doing cardiac rehab, we take blood sugars of patients, especially if they have diabetes. They tend to really go up and down, and we want to make sure that they were high enough to exercise to be safe. And if they would come in, their blood glucose levels would be spot on, maybe 100, they'd be fine. But when they're sick, or if they had a cold or anything like that, their blood glucose levels can be well over 200 just from being sick. You know, you'd interrogate them. You'd be like, were you eating donuts or were you eating a bagel before here? And they'd swear. And then you'd say, well, do you have a cold? Have you been battling something? They'd say, yes. So stress is a definite key player to causing these kind of problems. So if your blood glucose levels go up, whose job is it for my anatomy students or any anatomy to bring that blood glucose levels back down? Insulin. Now, insulin, by its own nature, is a storage hormone. So it takes that sugar from the blood and stores it into your cells, into various cells. Now, when you can't store, you only can store so much sugar. What do we do with all that extra sugar? It turns to fat. So there's the stress to fat relationship, right? Stress raises cortisol, cortisol raises blood glucose levels. Now you're not running away from that tiger like you would be in the old days where you might be burning that off. What are we doing? We're sitting behind a computer, then the computer just goes blank. You're working on a term paper. Has that happened to anyone? You lose everything, right? Cortisol shoots through the roof. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to wake up tomorrow and you're like, it doesn't happen that fast, fortunately. But if you're chronically stressed, think about it over time. It comes on insidious. Cortisol also actually damages that hippocampus. What was that responsible for again? Memory. It does it. It causes your hippocampus to actually shrink. They've actually documented this. It destroys something called BDNF, stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what this does, they call this sometimes layman's term, this is miracle growth of your brain. Okay? The more of this BDNF you have, the more cortical tissue you can have. So people that do certain things that increase this BDNF, that's going to actually stimulate your brain to grow. And a bigger brain, in this case, is going to be a better brain. Okay? Stress, think about it. It changes the blood flow distribution throughout the entire body. Blood will be shunted. You know, if you're running away from a tiger, where do we want to shunt blood? We want to shunt it to the muscle. We do want to shunt it to the brain. What we'll see when you have test anxiety, blood is preferentially going to be shunted to specific areas of the brain. So what you're looking at here is an image that I think off the internet that proves that's very good. It actually shows here's a major blood vessel coming in. And what what do you think all these vessels down here are? What part of the brain? What was that new part of the brain called? Yeah, you got, if you're going over here, these branches, they're going to the prefrontal cortex. These are going to the occipital lobe, which is going to be important for vision. Right? So these are all on the outside and periphery. These are all the cortical, the cerebral cortex vessels. What about down here in this central area? That central area is going to be more part of that limbic, the area that's more controlled involuntary function, things that you don't necessarily have to think of, like releasing hormones. This particular area, you have certain structures. You'll have the amygdala that's more deep, right? So this is on the outside. Deeper, you'll have the amygdala, right, which is part of that fear cycle. So when you are under stress and anxiety, when you're taking a test, what's going to happen? Where is it? Are you going to have this much blood flow out here? Is it important for you to basically be able to do calculus or to figure out something complex if a tiger is standing in front of you? What do you need to do? All right, hold on a second. You start writing down, so if you're doing physics, you're writing down, what's the trajectory of me getting my butt out of Dodge, No, by the time you do that, what did you just become? Right? So, yeah, everything down here is fast and reflexive, okay? So this is not where we want to be. If you're using this cortical real estate up here, you're spending all this time studying, hours and hours of time studying, you want to be able to put your mind in that same state while you're taking a test. So how do you do this? Well, guided imagery is one of the things that they do. Elite athletes, one of the things that they do before they do an event is they picture them doing an event over and over and over again. When you picture yourself doing an event over and over and over again, whether it be studying, whether it be an elite sports type event that requires balance and coordination, we have these other specific areas in the brain. Your brain can't distinguish whether you're visualizing yourself doing it and you're really doing it. So you're conditioning your brain to do the activity you want it to do. Now, what did I say about the brain? Does the brain tend to be optimal if you only do something once, or tend to do it over and over again? Over and over. Tiger Woods. How many times did he swing a golf club to get as good as he got? Right? That was something that was repetitive. So the more times you can put yourself, if you can now picture yourself taking the test and picture yourself with flowers, you take it in the petal field, if that relaxes you, whatever relaxes you, this way we can calm this area of the brain down. This way we can get the most activity out of that area. Trying to make sense intuitively? So, where does nutrition come in? Nutrition comes in, think about water. Water, you're more than 3/4 water. Different tissues, different percentages, but, your biggest cellular component is going to be water. Water is critical for balancing electrolytes. Electrolytes, you have, in order for these neurons to function, you have things like sodium and potassium, right? And they have to be in the right concentration inside the cell and outside the cell. And if we become dehydrated, we take the water out of the cell, then the relative amount of potassium, let's say we got lots of sodium out here. This is the outside. And you should have relatively lower amounts of sodium inside the cell. If you become dehydrated, this relative amount of potassium or sodium, that's going to be influenced. Or let's take potassium. You should have a smaller amount of potassium. By changing how much fluid is in your body, you're going to change this delicate balance. Because when we're looking at these electrolytes, let's pretend it's in a jar. This is a jar with water. Let's say that's the normal balance of how much water you should have and how much of the electrolytes you should have. As we take water away from this, as you become dehydrated, but we don't take any of these guys away, what's going to happen to their concentration? These guys' relative concentration over time. It's going to basically appear more concentrated. Now, by influencing these concentrations, you can wind up having problems with your nerves firing. You might have problems with, for example, if it's in your muscles, you might develop muscle cramp. So that's going to be very important. Go back to the water bottle, right? If you're dehydrated, what's this water bottle going to look like? Right? So as this bottle gets empty, there is much pressure inside it here. If the pressure that's being created is really contingent on this volume pressing up against the sides of the walls here, right? So when you're dehydrated, it's going to make your blood pressure low. If your blood pressure is low, what is that going to do to the amount of blood you might be able to pump up to your brain? Yeah, it decreases. Anyone here get off the couch really fast to answer the phone, and what happens? You get lightheaded, and that typically will happen because you change position. Your blood pressure temporarily drops. Now, if you're someone who has blood pressure naturally, you might wind up, on the floor. If you're taking blood pressure medication, you wind up on the floor because your blood pressure is too low. What happens? Not enough gets to the brain. Take a little nap. You lie down, the blood goes back to your brain, you wake back up. So maintaining blood pressure is going to be important for optimizing your brain function. Chemical reactions, everything, the ability to break down food, that's all contingent on water being present. Breaking down, so when you eat a potato, what's a potato rich in? Starch. Starch or what? Carbohydrate. So in order for you to take that starch, which is many sugar molecules linked together, in order for you to break that down, you need to have water present. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about the building blocks of every cell in your body, but not just every cell in your body. The brain itself as well. Carbohydrates, that is the brain's preferred fuel source. So when your blood glucose levels drop, how do you start to feel? You might start to feel lightheaded. You might start to actually feel shaky. You might start to sweat a little bit. And why do you think that is? If your brain is not getting any sugar, is that a stress to the brain? So what do we know stress hormones do to blood glucose levels? Raises it. So it might stimulate a little bit more of epinephrine, adrenaline. Adrenaline is that. You ever drive through a stop sign? What happens after you drive through a stop sign? Right? That's adrenaline working. Okay? And guess what that adrenaline's doing? It's raising your blood sugar level. So in this case, when your blood glucose levels fall, you have multiple mechanisms, a lot of redundancy in the system to make sure you can raise those blood sugar levels up. Okay? Proteins, we're going to see, they're key for building neurotransmitters. They're going to be extremely important for several neurotransmitters. Fat, 60% of your brain is fat. And the key fat that we're going to want to talk about are essential fats. So when something is an essential fat, what that means is it's a fat that our body cannot produce itself. We need to get it from some kind of outside source. So what are the essential fatty acids? The commercials. This. What are they? Yeah, if you do the omega fats, you have the omega-3 fats, you have the omega-6 fats. What do these fats do? Well, these fats really do influence how well your cells behave. These fats, the specific type of the essential fats, will influence how well the outside of the cell works. What was that outside of the cell called again? The cell membrane. And what were those cell membranes made out of? Good. Phospholipid bilayer. Okay? all of us anatomy teachers, proud and biology teachers, right? Phospholipid. What are lipids? Fats. So the type of fats that you ingest ultimately wind up in your cell membrane, right? So if you're eating foods that are rich in saturated fats, we need saturated fats. We need some saturated fats, but if we have too much saturated fats, they're going to behave. So let me borrow a little juice. Okay. Sorry. I don't think it's not even get when we look at fats, look at unsaturated fats versus saturated fats. Different fats, whether saturated, it's got hydrogen stuff. Everywhere that you possibly fit it is a hydrogen. And by saturating the fat, what happens is that fat, when you look at it structurally, very right? Yeah. Got a bunch of stuff. Right? Got a bunch of saturated fats. They're very rich. But it's still good hydrogen. Cell membrane, in order for it to work, it has to have some fluidity. There's sepsis on that cell membrane. That's functioning out. So what cell membrane is filled with just one kind of fat. The rich, the cell membrane itself can get very rich. Okay? So what happens when you get essential fats or unsaturated fats? Unsaturated fats, instead of being great, they'll have a little bend. So there's an area where they don't have hydrogen. Not important. What is important is actually that you didn't have to process. This is already working. And this creates a little bit of a gang. That's actually imagine how we're like this. Is there anywhere for us to right? So now, thankfully, right? Now by having more of that little bit of vent, that's going to help more of the fluidity within the cell. That might make sense. So, we'll talk about this in relationship to, you don't want to just look at, if you're going to eat foods that have fat, it's what was those foods diet? Those foods diet, whatever that animal ate, that its composition of its cell membranes is going to be contingent on what it was eating. So if you are feeding a cow, let's just say hamburger, which cow doesn't eat hamburger, that would be cruel, Here you go, Johnny, come to eat mommy. That cow will be filled with even more saturated fat. But now give it its indigenous diet, where it's supposed to be, cows are supposed to eat grass, right? Grass is a way that you can get these essential fatty acids. So grass-fed will always be better because of that. We'll look at micronutrients. I can't go into that, but the vitamins, minerals, all of these things are key components to making, for example, neurotransmitters. Your neurotransmitter, to make anything in the body, it's a recipe. And if you're missing any ingredient, what happens if you're baking what's something like cake, and you don't add yeast? Right? Yeast is supposed to do what? Make it rise, right? So you don't add the yeast, you're going to have these flat old muffins, right? That are probably going to chip you too, right? But what happens if you add all of the ingredients? If you add all of the ingredients, then you're going to get what? You can basically get a muffin that will be nice and plump and rise. Now, if we think about it from, take anything in your body, every reaction in your body is going to need vitamins and minerals. These are all components for enzymes to work. So if you have the right vitamins and minerals, whatever enzymes you have, enzymes are protein. If you have the right vitamins and minerals, that's going to make sure that those enzymes actually work. There's something called phytonutrients. phyto means plant, nutrient. You guys have your immune system. When you think of your immune system, what do you think of? What's that?
Fighting illness.
Fighting illness. So what in humans is our immune system? Right? White blood cells, right? Even your skin, right? That's part of your immune system. Kind of non-specific. So we have immunoglobulins. We have all of these things. Well, plants, they have their own immune system. And their immune system, just like you guys have a skin, plants' immune system, part of that, take a blueberry. Part of the blueberry's immune system are chemicals that they actually will make in their skin. That's where all the nutrition's at. Why? Because the foods that are out in the element, they have to basically evolve just like we have to basically be able to survive that. So different type of plants have different properties because they have to basically survive their own environment. So take mushrooms. What kind of environment does a mushroom have to grow in? Moist, dark. Who loves moist, dark environment? Bacteria, yeast, right? So, mushrooms, when you ingest them, they have already developed, because they live in that environment, they've already developed their own little chemicals that are in there that are anti-mold, antifungal, and so forth. They have to develop these. So, why? Because they're in that. So when we ingest certain foods certain plants that may have these kind of qualities, they actually are like medicine, because a food immune system transcends to our bodies when we ingest them. We'll talk about how that might play a critical role in how we choose certain. Look at the connection between neurotransmitters. So let's just take some. Serotonin, for example. Serotonin, when we think of serotonin, what do we think of? Happy, right? When your serotonin levels are high, you feel happy. We use this clinically if someone is depressed. They're generally not happy, so we can give them a medication that'll make more serotonin available. There are other things that we can do to naturally raise serotonin levels. Serotonin levels, if you're in a lot of pain, that's something that can lower your serotonin levels. So we give certain medications that raise these for people who are in pain. So what are some of the things that we can do to naturally raise our serotonin levels? Well, exercise is going to be a key one, and we'll talk about why that is. But when you eat certain foods, especially foods that have tryptophan is one of the precursors to make serotonin. So serotonin is the end product. That's what our cells are going to use to communicate. And when specific areas of the brain release serotonin, it gives you this feeling of well-being. Well, if you can produce the precursor, or you can ingest the precursor of this particular neurotransmitter, you're more likely to make it, right? This goes back to that recipe. So what else do we need? B vitamins. We need vitamin C. This is folic acid, zinc. Now, where do you think you might get these kind of foods, or these kind of nutrients? What kind of food? You'll get some from plants. You won't really get as much as the tryptophan. That's more of the amino acids. You'll get some. But, really you need a variety. You certainly, if you want to get the vitamin C, right, you're going to need to have more red peppers, and green peppers are really good. Citrus fruits are good for that. So by eating a variety, and where are you going to get minerals from? Well, minerals you're going to get from, plants which are in the ground, which are basically absorbing these minerals. We're secondary consumers of the minerals. So if you want to basically get it, how the baby, if you're a baby, that's funny. How it kind of fits actually. How the food is grown is going to be very important. That's why we'll talk about organic versus inorganic. So what happens after you you eat a turkey sandwich, how do you feel? You get sleepy. Why? Turkey's rich in tryptophan, right? Tryptophan is something that will naturally raise your serotonin levels, right? And then you wind up taking a little nap. That's only part of it, right? When someone's depressed, right, they have low levels of that serotonin. So there's a definite connection. Dopamine is your reward, arousal, and motivation hormone. So anytime you see something novel, anytime you see something new or do something new, that's exciting to your brain. That's going to light up these dopamine receptors. There are lots of different ways to increase dopamine levels. Exercise is one of them. You know, you get that runner's high where you don't feel any pain. You're raising certain levels of these neurotransmitters in your brain. Doing it all in a positive. Acetylcholine, critical for memory. Where do we get acetylcholine from? You get choline, you get it in eggs and different foods like that. Once again, B vitamins, vitamin. B vitamins in a lot of these. B vitamins are in so many different chemical reactions that when you're under stress, you tend to deplete these. So if you deplete your B vitamins, what do you have less of these to make? Right? You have less to make the neurotransmitters. Now what can you do? You can actually now become just depressed because you're not getting enough of the vitamins. Because you won't have the recipe to make the serotonin and so forth. So for our test anxiety people, you want to raise GABA levels. How do you do that? Don't take any tests, but that's not an option. Okay? Okay. So, what do you want to do? When it comes to nutrition, what would be a good way to basically put all of this stuff together? I like Michael Collins. I have my students, if they want, that's one of the options they have to read for extra credit. He basically puts all of nutritionalism into one sentence. Eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Okay? So it's not really saying, you know, you got to be a vegan, you got to be this, you got to do that. You know, if most of the foods that you're eating are plants, these are the ones that are going to have most of the medicine. These are the things that our bodies have evolved. This is kind of what our hunter-gatherers would eat. And, you know, we ate things that were easy to collect. So, you know, hunter-gatherers ate a lot of berries and things like that. And we did eat protein. You know, so we know we need the protein so we can make that those neurotransmitters. So this comes down to eating small, frequent meals. Once again, you are what you eat. So what would be a better breakfast in the morning based on what we spoke about before? A egg omelet with maybe some vegetables thrown in there, or Cheerios. Egg omelet, but Cheerios is the breakfast of champions.
They want you to think.
Right? What do Cheerios just have? Mostly. It's mostly just carbs. So if you just eat just carbs in the morning, what's going to happen to the blood glucose level? Goes up. Now who's going to bring it down? Insulin, and now what do you do? Now you're going to be playing this blood, glucose balancing act. Cortisol is going to be released to help raise it up. You're going to constantly be hungry. But now you eat an omelet. That omelet has protein. That protein has tryptophan. It has a variety of amino acids needed for neurotransmitters. You got the vegetables in there, which is going to give you some more of the phytonutrients. You've got plenty of B vitamins in there. So it's going to be much more satisfying. So it's a much better fuel source. So get a little bit of protein throughout the day. It helps stabilize those blood glucose levels. Uncontrolled blood glucose levels seems to be a real culprit when it comes to chronic disease. It contributes to inflammation, and most diseases are related to inflammation. Avoid processed and refined food. When you see sugar or flour, that basically means refined. That means that people like me, we took that food, took it from its normal environment, and ripped it down. And we do this so we can increase the shelf life. And as a general rule of thumb, the longer the shelf life is of the food, the shorter it's going to make your shelf life. Okay? Why is that? grain where we can make flour out of that grain, normally that particular, I might even have to break up the foliage off of that. Let's just say right here is a whole grain, and that's you'll have one part of the grain that's called the endospore. This is the sugar part. So this is like, if you're a baker, this is the part you're interested in. It's going to do what? Cake. All right? There's going to be a smaller part, right? And that's the germ. What's in the germ? That's where the essential oils are. Now, have you guys ever bought anything that has like essential oils in it, like flaxseed oil? What is that coming? What does the bottle look like? Dark, right? So you have to get it, you have to pull it out of a refrigerator, cover it, you have to protect it from light. That's why it's in this dark thing. You have to run home, stick it in the fridge. Why? Because if a little light comes in there, a little temperature comes in there, bam, it's oxidized. It's no good. It's oil. Right? So you can't cook with this kind of oil. So if you got these kind of essential oils in there, what is that going to do to the shelf life if you leave that in there? It will shorten it. Now, flour, you can do what with that? I have flour in my cupboard since 2000 and I don't know. You know, it looks like the old Western, you know, dead or alive sign. You know, it's like discolored and, you know, if I try to open it, it'll probably fall apart on me, right? That'll have a very long half-life or shelf life. Not only that, because it's so refined, you're taking away the fat and you're taking away the fiber, which is the other part. There's the other part of this, the bran. You guys know about bran, right? Bran is rich in fiber. What is fiber good for? Yeah, it actually will, it'll slow down how much of this sugar hits your bloodstream at once. So we call that the glycemic index. So when you eat a sugar, if your blood sugar levels spike really fast, because let's pretend this is sugar, right? If it's in this kind of form, what basically works on these simple refined sugars is, let's say it's a little bit bigger, would be an enzyme. Now, who's the enzyme that works on sugar? What was that? Amylase. So if you're broken down where you're fairly refined, amylase, what is about the surface area of that versus eating something that's larger, that looks like this, that has more complex structure, it might have fiber attached to it? Is the amylase going to be able to break that down as fast? Right? The enzymes have to do a lot more work. So if you eat a piece of white bread, picture what that white bread looks like. Right? It looks like a sponge. It has lots of holes. So when we think of surface area to allow these digestive enzymes to get in there and work, you see how much more surface area something like that would be versus, say, like one of those pieces of bread that have like grain and bread from Europe. The artesian bread, they've got crack a tooth on one of those things. It's very hard for your body to break down. That's a good thing because this way you don't get that huge bolus of sugar in your blood. Because it's getting that huge bolus, that's what's going to be a problem. So I recommend that if you're going to try to eat organic when possible. Organic food typically means that we don't spray them with pesticides and fungicides and things like that. So why is that important? Well, take a strawberry. Strawberries, anyone here ever buy strawberries? Where you buy them, and then you take them home, and what do they have on them? Hair, mold, something, right? I'm sure we could probably throw it in our microlab around what it is. But what does industry do to prevent that? They spray them with what? Pesticides and fungicides and things like that, shelf life. Is anyone growing strawberries around here right now? So where are they coming from right now? Right, so they're coming from maybe California, they could be coming from overseas, right? So in order to increase their shelf life, so you can buy them, we spray them, so the ones that are most contaminated are on this side. There's strawberry. Now, if you spray a food, essentially, you basically, if you're spraying it with antifungals, antimicrobials, and you're doing this, what are you doing for that plant as far as what are you taking over? What role? You're taking over the immune system. Now, you ever notice how, like, the organically grown strawberries are like this versus, you know, the inorganic conventional are like cranberries? Right? They're huge. And, you know, one of the theories behind that is because when you take away the role of the immune system, more resources are allocated towards growth. And there might be spraying it with other things as well. So, and most of the nutrition in the strawberry would be in where? In the skin, because what is that? That's the immune system. That's what's in contact with the environment. So, really, you want more of the skin and less of the sugary stuff on the inside, because most of the nutrition in that case is on the skin. So, these are the lists. If you type in environmental working groups, Dirty Dozen, you just Google that, you can get easy access to this. They change it every once in a while. These are the ones that are least contaminated with. These are the ones that are most contaminated. That means they tested higher in various chemicals. Now, we don't really know all of the effects of these chemicals that you put on them, but it just makes sense to try to limit your exposure as much as possible. When we look at this, if you want to increase the shelf life, what would be a great option? Buy it in what form? Buy it frozen, especially when they're out of season. Buy it frozen. And often manufacturers, because they know they're going to freeze it, guess what they may not use as much of? They may not use as much of the chemicals just because they know they're going to freeze it. So that's something to consider. Sleep. What role does sleep play? Sleep is extremely important for executive function, extremely important for that prefrontal cortex. When you're not sleeping, your memory is not going to be as good. So this is where it affects all of these different areas. Motor dexterity. Athletes, they know they need to get a lot of sleep. 8 hours of sleep, they say, is ideal. Okay? Sleep helps while you're sleeping. So you've been studying, you're studying. When you're in your natural sleep cycle, your brain literally replays what was going on that day. And that contributes to sometimes what you dream about and things like that. You have a bad day, generally you don't have great dreams that day. Right? So this is when you potentiate those memories. So what was that area of the brain that was real important for forming the memories? The hippocampus. So now that hippocampus is helping. Now in the natural sleep cycle, it's replaying. So the more sleep you get, the more you'll naturally play that tape recorder, which will help strengthen those memories. What are some ways to improve your sleep? You want to sleep in a cooler room. The reason you want to sleep in a cooler room is because when you go to sleep, what's going to happen to your body's metabolism, basal metabolic rate? It slows down, so your body's own temperature will get lower. So if you're in a hot room and now you're sleeping if you're in a hot room and your body temperature is getting colder, what's going to happen? There's going to be more of a difference, and your body's not going to like that. So if you're sleeping in a cold room, when your body naturally gets cooler, there's going to be less contrast, and your body will sleep naturally a little bit better. 69 seems to be the preferred temperature for most people. Remove the clock. If you're sitting there staring at the clock, that's not going to be good, especially when you know you have to get up. Don't eat within 2 hours or drink. Is alcohol good to drink? Knock down a couple. You fall asleep fast, but what does it do? Yeah, it interrupts with REM sleep, and your body has to work all night to basically break that down, but giving your body more work. Limit TV, okay? Just excess light, too much light at the end of the night interferes with your natural circadian rhythm. We're supposed to, towards nighttime, have less light actually be going into our eyes. When you have less light going into your eyes, that'll allow you to produce, what's that sleep hormone? Melatonin. Your body will take serotonin, which is naturally present because you produce some of that by having light go in your eyes, and it'll help you convert that serotonin into melatonin, which will allow you to sleep. Another reason, this is why depressed people often will wake up in the middle of the night. Why? Because they have less of that serotonin to make enough of the melatonin to keep them asleep throughout the night. So, what amino acid do we want to get plenty of? Tryptophan. Good. Why a heating pad? What is the heating pad kind of induce? Putting warm. Some of you guys in college, probably your roommate put his hand in cold warm water. What happens? It relaxes things, right? When you're under stress, right, that stress response system, what happens? What does your skin look like? It gets cool and pale. Why? Blood's being shunted away from there. Having a rosy hue under stress is not important. But so that stress response, blood away from the skin. You do warm water, what does that do? Blood that brings blood to the skin. What's the message you're sending your brain? This is relaxing. Okay? Exercise. Exercise, in addition to improving all motor dexterity and strength, it reduces the incidence of diseases. They've actually done studies that have shown that it improves cognitive function. There's a book out there I sometimes recommend to my students called Spark, and it's all about these various benefits of exercise. Naperville High School actually incorporated treadmills where they had the students. Their gym class is much different. They don't have like the dreadful, okay, this week we're doing square dance. This week we're doing this. Everything is individualized. All the kids basically do either a treadmill, they do a physical activity that they want to do. So they're doing it. By them exercising more, the results show that their reading scores doubled and their math scores went up 20-fold. Okay? So exercise has a huge effect. So what do you want to do before a test? You want to cram? Maybe if you got an 8 o'clock test, get into the gym at 6 o'clock. Get the heart rate going. Get the blood flow. Okay? Exercise improves cognitive function. When you're exercising, where is it sending the blood flow? It's sending it to the brain. And it seems to have more of a balancing effect on all of the neurons. After you exercise, how do you feel? Stressed or relaxed? Relaxed. Exercise is like biofeedback for the autonomic nervous system. When you're exercising, that's the stress. That's stimulating that fight or flight, essentially, right? You're using the same machinery. But it's when you stop. So you take yourself, here's where you were before you exercise. You were at this stress level. You hit the treadmill. It takes you above that. And you maintain that. And then when you stop, what happens? You'll go below whatever that baseline stress level is. That's kind of how biofeedback works. So now when you do that, you just improve the blood flow to the brain. So all the good nutrition that you eat is now gotten to the brain. And now your neurotransmitters seem to work better. So which type of exercise would be best? You got cardio, what else? A little bit of everything. What I'm looking for is exercise that incorporates more areas of your brain. So, even something like table tennis would be very good. Because think about how tough that is. That requires what? Serious eye-hand coordination. You got to move fast. You got to be able to cut, jive. You got to do all of this stuff. Right? So that's one way. Not necessarily, running 10 miles. That's helpful, but in nature, there's some studies that are showing that's not the best type of exercise. There's a lot more research being done on more of the interval training. And the reason is we have different muscle types and things like that. And in nature, where was the last time you've seen an animal just get up and run 10 miles and stop without a pause? You know, we kind of are wired to basically do these short bursts of activity. So you should incorporate those in your exercise program. Studying tips, 80-20 rule. 80% of the benefit you get out of studying is usually within the first 20% of the time that you're actually doing it. So if you study for 2 hours, really the first, half an hour is probably going to be where you're going to get the most benefit. So if you have that in your schedule, take lots of small, frequent breaks. Make it a multimodal experience. By making it multimodal, what are we doing now? We're using vision, we're using auditory, we're writing, right? When you're writing, you're using one part of it. Now as I'm saying it, as I'm writing it, I'm saying it. Now I'm using this part of it. I'm looking at it, I'm using this part of it. Okay, so the more senses you can use, the more likely you'll be able to retrieve it when you need it. Okay? Once again, study after exercise. They did a study, 30 minutes of treadmill training increased the problem solving by 10%. So that can certainly make a difference. Practice, actually the other thing I want to mention. Use pictures. I tell my anatomy students all the time. Don't just read text and look at words. When your brain works, it looks at these things as symbols. That's it. Memorizing words in order. That's not going to be very productive. But if you can incorporate illustration, use animations for your own, you're going to get a lot more out of that. Practice makes perfect. Repeat to remember. If you want to remember something, repeat it over and over again. That's going to strengthen those neuronal connections. It's going to potentiate the memory. Another thing I always tell my students, try to teach it. It becomes painfully apparent whether you understand something when you try to teach someone something. So I'm here and I'm saying, now the way this works, if all of a sudden I don't know what's happening, what am I doing? Da, da, da. This is how you know whether you're ready to take a test, if you can explain it. Because memorizing words on a page is not going to cut it. Because, that basically means if I change the way I word that question just a little bit, outside of the context that you might have understood it or memorized it, then you're going to be lost. So you'll pick that up if you, teach someone else. Teach is to learn twice. And history is not destiny, so if you're doing something wrong, make sure you change up what you're doing. If you're not succeeding, change your routine. Try something new. Add something new to the rest. So, which brain do you want? Good. Yeah.